Hello, everyone. Alec Peters here. I am with Star Trek luminary and legend David Gerrold, writer of The Trouble with Tribbles, The Cloud Minders, creative consultant on Star Trek The Next Generation, creator of Land of the Lost. What are the other? Hugo winner, Nebula winner.
The Martian Child.
The Martian Child, which was a movie with John Cusack, which was autobiographical.
Yeah. It's a true story of how. Well, the movie wasn't true story, but the book
the book was
true about how I adopted my little boy.
And so now we are at the 50th anniversary of Star Trek, and we are in an election year here in the United States. A lot of it has to be one of the most profound election years certainly in my lifetime.
I think it's one of the most interesting election years in American history.
I would say so, and Star Trek has always been something that reflects the current state of our culture and our society. Certainly in the 60s it was a mirror for so many things that were happening. But we're at a turning point with the franchise. The movies that Paramount's making have, shall we say, struggled at times to find their footing with the fan base, which is very divided about them. But we have we have this new TV series. TV series is the wrong word. It's a streaming series that'll be on CBS All Access that Brian Fuller is the showrunner on, and Nicholas Meyer is one of the writers on. So maybe there's reason to be optimistic.
I'm optimistic that Nick Meyer and Brian Fuller are on the show. They're good writers.
Yeah, I certainly couldn't be more excited about any duo that they could have picked.
Yeah.
I think.
I could have been more excited if they'd have called me, because Star Trek is fun to write. Look, the original series, you made a point. The original series was really at its best about the issues that the nation was going through at the time. There were stories about mutual assured destruction, about the Vietnam War, about drug use, about income inequality. And even The Tribbles is an ecological story about an invasive species. So there's all of this pertinence of the original series, and some of those issues are still pertinent today. I think to a great degree, the success of the show as a phenomenon, the studio kind of backed off from let's do these great issue stories and did a lot of stuff. And a lot of it was good. I'm not saying it wasn't. It's just that focusing on the hard issues like Gene Roddenberry wanted to do and Gene L. Kuhn wanted to do, that has kind of slipped by the wayside. I'm hopeful that Brian Fuller and Nicholas Myers will be more aggressive in that area, because having those conversations is important. I mean, I love the superhero stories, and I love the various ghost stories and the blockbusters. They're great fun. But we also need stories that make us be aware of the world we're living in today. We need stories like The Big Short and The Insider and Hurt Locker. We need to pay attention to the consequences of decisions we're making today. And I was just looking at some of the classic movies of the 50s, and like a couple of my favorites are Ben-Hur and 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea and Singing in the Rain, and there was that was a golden age of movie making, because the movies were ambitious to compete with television. They were stretching everything, including the size of the screen. I like that kind of ambition. Television has gotten very ambitious. There's a lot of great shows, Suits and How to Get Away with Murder and
Game of Thrones, Walking Dead, yeah.
But issue shows, there's a lot of issue shows. Madam Secretary is picking up where West Wing left off.
Yeah.
And I would like to see the new Star Trek be very issue-oriented, because we cannot live in a fantasy world. We can't live in a world where we're not getting accurate information about what's happening next and the decisions we have to make. Part of the problem with this election year, look, a democracy, a republic only works when your voting population is well educated and well informed, and that has been the media has not done its job. We have not seen the level of investigative journalism. There are stories that aren't getting reported, like there were 400 people arrested in Washington, D.C. for protesting income inequality and other things, and it didn't make the major news channels. We need to hear about that. That's a lot more important than finding out that one of the Kardashians had a car accident. So that's my concern, is that there is so much at stake in this year's elections, and we're not getting all the information we need. Entertainment television is a way to crystallize the arguments and let us, bump heads. Here's this point of view, here's this point of view. Let us hear both sides of that. An entertainment show can do that. All the various Law and Order and the CSI and the other shows, they weren't afraid to argue both sides of an issue, and you could walk away better informed.
I would absolutely agree with you about Law and Order. Whenever I watch it, they love tapping into the latest headlines.
Yeah.
But they do it in such an educated manner. They don't sensationalize it. I think your point is so accurate. I've always been fascinated by the way they've done. Dick Wolf and his team have done such an amazing job at that. They'll take an issue, whatever that is, and they'll as you say, they'll show both sides
They'll
of it.
dissect it for the audience. Yeah. Star Trek should do that. The news show, artificial intelligence. Yeah, all right. We know that data is possible and data is sentient, but that's and Melinda Snodgrass did that great script, Measure of a Man. Is data just a machine, or is he a sentient being? This is the kind of storytelling that Star Trek should be doing, saying here is a technological thing that we're going to have to deal with in the future. Let's examine the moral and social implications of this thing. For instance, we know that every time an advanced culture meets a primitive culture, the primitive culture gets destroyed. So which is why we have a prime directive. But what happens when we run into a superior culture? How do we protect ourselves and our culture, or are we going to be assimilated? Those are questions that deserve more than an answer that gets quickly and cleanly resolved before the last 5 minutes and you go to the final commercial.
Well, also, in the 10 years since Enterprise went off the air, storytelling on TV is fundamentally changed.
Yes.
I mean, some people will trace that back to The Sopranos. I would argue that it gets traced back to Babylon 5.
No, before that, Hill Street Blues.
I was just about to say, before that, Hill Street Blues. You had serialized storytelling where one episode was represented in the future.
In Hill Street Blues, and believe me, a lot of us were studying, why did this work? What was the structure? We discovered there was the A, B, and C stories there was the small story that got resolved. There was the larger story that got resolved. There was the big story that continued.
Right.
So that you had to come back for that big story. So they would do their story arcs in either 2 or 4 episodes. And occasionally they'd have a one-off. But by doing that, you were hooked into 2, 3, or 4 episodes, and then they would resolve whatever that arc was, but you'd still come back for the next story arc.
That's right.
This worked very well for Hill Street Blues. L.A. Law extended that story arc a whole season. And now we have shows that extend their story arcs across multiple seasons. There's The Closer, which evolved into Major Crimes, has had a story arc that started in the last season of The Closer, actually even before that, and is still continuing through 4 or 5 seasons of Major Crimes. And it's a low-key story arc, but it's the relationships of the characters in their own lives. And I think it works very well for the show because, okay, they solved the murder this week, but you come back because you want to know what happens to Rusty, or you want to know what happens with, I can't remember the guy's name, silly me, but you want to know what happens with Sharon and so on.
And if you look at TV now, it doesn't matter, whatever the big show is that we're all watching, whether it's Daredevil or House of Cards or Walking Dead or Better Call Saul or Game of Thrones, you name it. They're all serialized storytelling.
Yes.
That is the way the best of TV is being done these days.
Now that harks back to Roots, 1977, which was a mini-series of 12 episodes, and then they came back and did another 12 episodes. I think that was it. And so you have Roots, and then Roots The Next Generation. And then they even did a 2-hour thing called The Gift, which fits right between those two. But
it's a world building.
Yeah.
It's basically building out the story, the backstories.
But that's the mini-series idea is why Game of Thrones exists so well, is that you will stay with Game of Thrones from episode 1 all the way, and I mean, if they go 7, 8, however many seasons that HBO wants to run it, they will. Now, usually HBO stops after 7 seasons, but
because shows start getting too expensive.
Yeah, but there may be enough audience and enough story that, hey, 8, 9 seasons, it would be a breakthrough for HBO.
Well, also, in addition to these serialized storytelling we're also getting shorter seasons. We're not going to see 22, 23 episodes of Star Trek.
Over.
We're going to see 12.
Now, you'll
10,
get
11,
20
12, 13.
episodes of a sitcom.
Sure, because they're half hours.
And maybe the networks, CBS, NBC, ABC, will get 20 episodes of an hour-long drama, but they might break it. Generally, when you go to USA or any of the other cable channels, they'll give you 10 episodes, and then they'll bring in another 10-episode series, and then they'll come back with the next 10 episodes.
Like Walking Dead is doing now.
Yeah.
Walking
Suits,
Dead's over.
Major Crimes, so on. 10 episodes, and then we'll be back in summer. They do their 10 episodes in summer. We'll be back in winter.
Right. Yeah. And especially the way we're watching, too, repeats are almost a thing of the past.
Yeah, the irony here is when we pitched the Star Wolf series, we designed it for 10 episodes and 10 episodes and 10. And this was 10 years ago, and we've been pitching this thing for 10 years. I hate to say it's not obsolete, but some of the ideas that nobody had ever done before, other people have picked up on.
Sure.
So if we did it, people say, "Oh, well, we've seen all this before." So
right.
If I ever got to do it, the first step would be, okay, what do we do that's ambitious and groundbreaking that nobody else has done yet?
Gotcha.
So.
Well, let's talk about the new Star Trek movie. Star Trek Beyond is coming out here this summer, and Justin Lin,
I just heard something very interesting about that.
There's
this process called Barco Escape, which is like Cinerama, where they have 2 additional screens on the sides, and Paramount has made a deal with Barco Escape to do this Cinerama wraparound for 20 minutes of Star Trek Beyond. So that'll be worth looking at. I wonder if they'll be able to do it in 3D as well. So we'll see.
Yeah. Well, I think it's going to be interesting to see. Certainly, we're fans of Justin Lin, the director.
He's very good.
We're huge fans of his Fast and Furious movies.
Oh, yeah.
Rob and I both
my
love
son
them.
and I. Oh, new Fast and Furious. Got to go to the movies.
Got to go to the movies. Exactly.
Yeah, love them.
And they're great. So, and he's obviously a fan of Axanar. He came out in support of, or I should say, he came out against the lawsuit that Paramount, CBS is.
Well, let me say this about the
Axanar.
lawsuit, and you've heard me say this before. There's a third party in the lawsuit who doesn't have a lawyer in the meetings, and that's the fans, the audience. And I believe that because of the Star Trek phenomenon has existed for a half a century now, that the wants and needs of the audience have to be considered, and the audience has demonstrated by the success of all the fan films, New Voyages and Phase 2 and Farragut and all the others, there's this hunger for more Star Trek. That demonstrates an enthusiasm for Star Trek that the studios have to acknowledge and recognize. And I believe that any settlement or any resolution has to allow for the interests and needs of the audience as much as the intellectual property rights of the studio and the fun that Axanar and everybody else is having. Hey, let's do our own Star Trek. It's a difficult situation, and I'm hoping that it resolves in favor of the fans.
Well, we do too. I think we absolutely want to make sure that that fan films continue to go, and because there is a ready audience for who want a nostalgia for a different Star Trek than they may be getting in the movies?
The original Star Trek had something special. It had Kirk, Spock, and McCoy. It had this incredible cast, but it had stories that dealt with issues, and I think that's what the hunger is. It's not just let's do more stories with these people. It's let's do stories that allow us to grapple with issues. And the one I did for New Voyages, Blood and Fire, was about the fear of AIDS. It was about this very destructive disease, and everybody is terrified of it. And people do terrible things when they're scared. And that's an issue story.
And fan films are able to dive into some of that aren't being addressed in Star Trek movies.
Star Trek should be courageous and ambitious. Gene Roddenberry promised that the Next Gen would have gay crew members, and and he promised it not only to the fans, he said it in his staff meeting. I was there. And then and even Rick Berman wrote a memo, we should address stories about AIDS. And then when it came time for the rubber to meet the road, it didn't happen. And Star Trek still hasn't had an openly gay character who's been able to have a relationship. And every other show has got gay people and lesbians and transgender and bisexual.
Right. We get Rob and I get asked about this all the time, and it was interesting. And my answer often, we get the question, are there going to be gay people? And my answer is generally, why does it matter? Of course, I'm sure some of the characters are gay, but no one cares 300 years from now.
If it matters to the story, then
That's right. But we're not going to be gratuitous and introduce it just to do it. And I think what we're trying to say is there's a 300 years from now, it's irrelevant. No one cares.
Star Trek should have been the first, and it had, because it was ambitious and issues, and instead it never came near the issue. It never really did the kind of issue story that Gene loved to do.
Right.
And so...
Because he always had, let's face it, the studio's going to
But the studio gave him carte blanche with Next Generation. They said, you don't have a network censor. We're going straight syndication. And yet Next Generation was even more cautious.
But this is why the fan films are important.
Yes.
Is because you were able then to go to Star Trek New Voyages, and you were able to do that story.
And I have to give high praise to James Cawley, who was totally committed to the success of it, and there was an incredible cast and crew, a lot of enthusiasm.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't think any other fan film would have taken on that project.
It was difficult. We had to shoot 80 pages in 10 days.
Yeah,
we were working long hours.
Yeah, so you got that story made, which is awesome. And I point out that Rob and I, when we were doing our casting meetings for Axanar, we got this fantastic transgendered actress, who our casting director just loved, said you got to see her, and she was in what's it wasn't Orange Is the New Black, I forget what show it was, and she was amazing, and we were like, we need to make her the Vulcan captain.
Yeah.
It was just, and how wonderful that we had that opportunity to cast a person.
But it's not whether they're transgender or gay. It's can they sell it on screen, and that's all you're looking for.
Again, it really doesn't matter whether you are or you aren't, right?
Yeah,
we want to judge people by their character, not by, as Martin Luther King said, the color of their skin or their sexual orientation or their sexual, whatever that is. And, listen, in the future, when we're talking about Axanar, which takes place, 300 years in the future, there are bigger issues than what religion you are.
Yes.
There are different species, for God's sake. That's why I say there's a whole nother level.
I'll give you an example. You should look at this. There's a wonderful movie with Michael Douglas, and he plays a writer. It's called Wonder Boys, and I think it's based on a book by Michael Chabon, who won a Pulitzer Prize. So, not for that one though. But Michael Douglas is a writer. Robert Downey Jr. is a writer, and Tobey Maguire is a young writer, and they have this drunken night out one night, and the police come by and they're looking for Tobey Maguire's character because he's gotten lost and missing, and Michael Douglas says, "Oh, he's inside. I'll go get him." And he opens the door to the spare bedroom, and here is Robert Downey Jr. has just woken up, and Tobey Maguire is cuddling with him in bed, and nobody says anything about the relationship, about gay, about anything. It's just. you have to get up now. They're looking for you. And he gets up, and they're talking about everything else, and nobody even acknowledges
right.
It's just played as if this is a normal possibility, but
it is a normal right.
But it also reveals a lot about the two characters. Particularly Robert Downey Jr., who is the wild man kind of writer, and Michael Douglas is the old, almost has-been writer, and Tobe Hooper is the beginning writer who's written a pretty good book. So.
Right. I think, getting it back to Justin Lin, the thing I was going to mention about Justin Lin is he came out the other day and said that he felt like he was directing a $150 million fan film. And we were like, wow, I think that's very refreshing to hear. I know that we have a friend, Chris Gore, who you may know, and Chris Gore told me months ago, he said, we were talking about what makes a fan film. What is the definition of a fan film? And because there's always, people say, well, you're a professional, because usually professional crew, or that the hallmark of a fan film is it's not really that good, or whatever. And Chris Gore's take on it was, he said, a fan film is any film made by someone who's a fan of the material.
Yeah.
And
so the Superman with Chris Reeves is a great fan film. It's
The Force Awakens is a fan film.
Yeah, because
these are all fan films because those guys are fans of the material.
Yeah, even and I know they've taken a lot of flack, but even Batman versus Superman is full of references that show the people making the movie were well aware of the history of the...
More than I was. Rob had to explain things that happened in Batman, Superman to me, and I'm a pretty, well-versed geek, but not in the DC universe. And he's like, oh, well, this was this, and this is this, and I was like, okay, I didn't know that. So it was clearly aimed at a fan.
Now, I understand the nitpicking and the complaints and whatever, because I have many of my own, but at the same time, I was sitting there watching the movie thinking, wow, okay, yeah.
Exactly. And I'm going to move your mic here so it's it's more aiming at you. The thing that's really interesting about that movie is the fact that, and Rob Burnett is the guy that has been preaching this for as long as I've known him. We've been friends for about 2 years now. And he keeps saying things to the effect of Batman, Superman, that 10 years ago you would have killed for this movie.
Yeah.
20 years ago, we didn't even imagine that you could see a Batman versus... And here we are complaining about it.
Yeah.
Right? It's like, we are such spoiled little brats at this point. You know? And
I was looking at some low-budget pictures. I've been, doing my own research. And I was looking at some low-budget movies and thinking, if you could have brought this out 20 years ago, you'd have won an Oscar for special effects. Now it's just... Yeah, you can do that. No problem.
Yeah, exactly. So the times have changed, and we're living in a time where all our childhood nerdisms are making their way onto the big screen. I mean, I saw it last night was the world premiere of Civil War, of Captain America: Civil War. I can't wait to see that movie. I mean,
and the reaction to it has been very, very positive.
Absolutely. So Marvel continues to steamroll.
Well, Marvel has figured out a formula that works very well for them. But there's a point how, the last one where they're lifting up the whole city, and I'm thinking they may have. This isn't jumping the shark because I'm buying into it. But each picture has to be bigger than the last one. At what point does the whole thing, get too big? It collapses like a souffle. But so far,
well, I think Civil War brings it back to earth. I think in a good way. I know, because as much as I'm totally looking forward to X-Men Apocalypse, because I love Days of Future Past, and
that was good.
It was a great movie, and Bryan Singer is a friend of our production and a good friend of Rob Burnett's. But
I love that character with QuickTime.
Quicksilver,
right? Sorry.
He was great. Yeah.
QuickTime is Apple.
Yeah.
So he's my favorite. I just love that one sequence. Which
he was going. That was very well.
I was so disappointed we didn't get to see more of him.
Well, you will. But even when I saw the trailer for Apocalypse, which I'm totally looking forward to, I left the trailer going, I kind of feel I've seen the world being destroyed.
Yeah.
It's got among my friends, I may be the only one who's not looking forward to the new Independence Day. I'm like, oh, I kind of feel like I've seen that movie before.
Well, maybe they'll do something new and interesting. I go into the movies, and this goes back 30 years. Somebody said, if I'm paying, and at that point it was like $6. If I'm paying $6 for a movie, I'm going to have $6 worth of good time, no matter what's on the screen.
Exactly.
And a couple of weeks later, we had to go see a movie that a friend was in that we knew was going to be awful. It was already new, you know. It was like, I think it was Suspiria or one of those. And it's one of those ones where the bats come flying and you're shouting, "Cut the strings!" You know. But we had a great time, because we made up our minds, all of us. We know this is going to be a dreadful movie. Let's go have fun seeing a dreadful movie.
Sure.
So that's my attitude. I don't know what the movie is going to be, but if I'm paying now, it's like $17 because I'm going to pay for the decent seat, whatever.
Right.
So I'm paying $17. You better believe I'm going to have $17 worth of fun.
That's right.
I don't care what they put on the screen.
I'm always amazed that people say they walked out of a movie. I'm like, walked out of a movie? How bad can it? How offensive must it be for you to leave?
Sergeant Pepper with the Bee Gees.
Oh.
I walked out on 20 minutes in, and I got my money back. And they said, "You're not the first. You won't be the last."
Well, do you think,
I mean, it was Beatles music, and I walked out on it.
Well, do you think that Star Trek? I mean, I think we all have high hopes for the Star Trek streaming show. I'm not going to call it a TV show with because of Brian Fuller and Nicholas Meyer. What about the movies? Do you think we've gotten to a point where Star Trek does not belong on the movie screen anymore?
I've never felt Star Trek worked well on the movie screen, and I'll tell you why. It's an issue-oriented TV series. But when you go to the movies, you have to have a bad guy, and you have to have a big blockbuster climax. So if you look at all the Star Trek movies with Kirk, Spock, and McCoy, we always ended up going after a villain.
Yes.
Except for 4, where we had to
save the whales.
Save the whales. But which was great fun. As silly as it was great fun.
It was fun. It was like great.
And my complaint about those films is they destroyed the Enterprise in number 3.
Right.
And so number 4, we didn't even see the Enterprise.
No Enterprise.
And you know, to me, the Enterprise is the hero of the show. The movies are about villains, but the TV series is about seeking out exploring strange new worlds, seeking out new life and new civilizations,
Right.
and boldly going out there and exploring and discovering and learning. And you know, the Organian episode, Errand of Mercy, and some of the others, the Corbomite Maneuver, are about exploration and making friends, and learning a little humility.
Yes.
Which would be a very, very good thing. As a species, we need to learn humility. So the TV series allows you to tell those stories. A movie is very difficult. The only time anybody ever told a movie that was really rapturous was Close Encounters of the Third Kind.
Right.
You can't do that in a Star Trek movie. I mean,
well, what about the motion picture?
That Roddenberry tried with the motion picture
Yeah.
is very ambitious, but the musical score, as brilliant as it was turgid, and the special effects were dark, and you left feeling, oy.
Yeah.
You know, you didn't feel inspired by it.
Right.
It is a very difficult challenge, and
So maybe Star Trek, you know, I kind of think that the Star Trek that we all know and love, we will get on the streaming on CBS All Access next year. With Brian Fuller and Nick Meyer at the helm.
Well,
but
we'll see
the
what
movies,
they do, yeah.
Listen, I guess I kind of don't. I understand why Paramount is pushing Star Trek movies to be like Guardians of the Galaxy, which they say they want something more like Guardians of the Galaxy.
Paramount has the rights to do the movies.
Right.
CBS has the rights to the TV
As we
TV
well
shows.
know,
So,
yes.
yeah. So anyway, that means that if Paramount wants a piece of the Star Trek pie, they have to do movies.
Right.
And that's
And that boxes them into, you know, nowadays too, they're no cheap movie. You know, you're either doing a movie that's $150 million or more, or you're doing a $5 million or less. So they're kind of boxed into, they have to do a blockbuster.
Paramount has a kind of a box, a $30 million box. They will make films for $30 million or less. You could do, I mean, look, James Cawley has demonstrated, Axanar will demonstrate it. Others have demonstrated you can do a film that looks like it cost $150 million for less than $30 million. The studio system carries the weight of the overhead.
Of course.
Plus, the actors show up wanting $6 million
Of course.
paydays. And so you end up carrying a burden that makes it untenable. Whereas I think if you made your actors and your cast and your crew profit participants, honest profit participants, none of this net stuff, but here's here's your share of the gross. It may be only a teeny little share, but it would be more than, and treat everybody as profit participants. Then you can bring the initial cost down. Then your film earns out a lot faster, and everybody makes some money out of it. The way it's structured now is they have this thing called the net. Well, there is no profit in the net because everybody who has a piece of the gross takes theirs, and there's nothing left for the net.
Right.
So the way it's financed now doesn't make sense. And look, I've said this before. You've heard me do this speech. The studio system is like dinosaurs, and they have been hit by an asteroid called the internet. The internet and technology and the very efficient low-cost cameras and editing stuff. I mean, for $10,000, you shoot a movie in 4K and edit it on your home, on your laptop. So you now have, after the asteroid, you have all these egg-sucking little therapsids running around making their own little movies, and the dinosaurs are still staggering around.
Right. The
dinosaurs can lay one egg a year, and the little fan films can do 2 or 3 films a year. And so in an evolutionary thing, the fan films can adapt and move forward a lot faster than the big studio. Now, I think the studio blockbusters are a necessary part of the marketplace.
Sure.
But I think what the studios have to recognize is that there is this rich environment of young new filmmakers who are taking advantage of the new technologies and making the low-budget films, finding other ways to get their films made. And the studios have one thing that the fan films don't have. They have distribution. The studios can monetize fan films by providing distribution. And I think that's where we create a new filmmaking ecology. It just takes one studio to show how it can be made to work, and everybody will get on board, because in Hollywood, everybody wants to be the first to be second.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we're going to wrap it up. Thank you for coming. I hope you have a good 50th
anniversary. Did you want to talk about that one last thing that we are working on?
Well, shall we? Okay.
Yeah,
we'll
let's
talk,
hint. Let's give them something special.
So tell us about that book series you started writing 20 years ago, 25 years ago?
I actually
with
started working on it in 1972.
Oh my gosh.
I did 14 chapters, and then my agent called and said, I sold The Man Who Folded Himself. You have to finish that one first. So The War Against the TORR, it's a trilogy, a book. I've just finished book 5 of my trilogy, and I'm editing it now. It's now I finished the first draft. Now we're working on the editing. It's very large, very long. It's probably be the peak book in the series, because it resolves, it reveals a lot. And then books 6 and 7, there's large parts of them already written, so there's progress. And the publisher wants to release all 7. The first 4 will be reprinted, and then the next 3 all at once. So we're working on that. And there are some guys who are talking. They would like to kickstart a production to do a miniseries based on it.
Are those guys? Is one of those guys named Rob Burnett?
Yeah, Rob Burnett keeps coming to me and begging, when do I get to see?
Rob thinks he just loves this book series.
Well, I love Rob. I think Rob is very talented.
He's been begging me to read it forever, and when I started reading it, I was like, okay, this is pretty good. The first chapter, I was like, he did what? and that kind of got me hooked. So Rob and I will hopefully...
Heinlein liked the books too.
Did he?
Yeah, Heinlein used to call me and say, "Where's the next book?"
Oh.
He says, "I want to finish this series before I die."
Well, now,
sorry, I let Robert A. Heinlein
boy, you really
down.
let Heinlein down.
Well, it wasn't my fault he died. You know.
Robert. Bad news. So anyway, that's a project that Rob and I are going to work with you on, and we'll have more news about that shortly. And I'd be very excited to take that to the screen and see what we can do.
It would be a lot of fun, and it would be something nobody's done before.
Give
or
someone
yet.
else, give our fans out there the elevator pitch for their war against the
Well,
Torr.
basically, you don't invade a planet with giant machines. You colonize a planet, and you take your corn and bees and your cows and pigs, and you take all the creatures you need to establish a colony, just like the Pilgrims came to America and brought all the animals and all the plants. And so...
And smallpox.
And smallpox, yeah. And so the series is about an alien ecology invading the Earth. Not the aliens, but the ecology. And so it's a totally different approach to who are these aliens and how do we discover who's really behind this. And when we find out who's behind it, we'll find out we've been looking in the wrong place.
So there you go. So look forward to that project coming in the near future. And thank you all for joining us. And David, thank you. And enjoy your 50th anniversary of Star Trek
I'm
this
so
year.
old.
Oh,
If
my.
I'd have known I was going to get this old, I'd have taken better care of myself.
Thank you, everyone. Live long and prosper.